Hello, Pastor Chris here. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, whatever time of the day it is that you're choosing to listen to today's episode of Well of the Word. We are beginning a new study as we have wrapped up our time in the Sermon on the Plain in Luke chapter 6, and we will be in Jonah now. My first summer here as youth pastor in June, July through August of 2016, I preached through Jonah at the summer picnics. Most of you were probably not there. And many of you who were probably don't remember those sermons. It's been a long time. And so I'm glad to go through this short minor prophet book with you. And so today we're going to be in Jonah chapter 1, verses 1 through 5. So I'm going to read that text for us, and then we will get right into what we can learn today from Jonah 1 through 5. All right, looking at the text on my right, and the words will be right here for you. Now the word of the Lord came to Jonah, the son of Amittai, saying, Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and call out against it, for their evil has come up before me. But Jonah rose to flee to, I love this word, it's so fun to say, not really, Tarshish, from the presence of the Lord. He went down to Joppa, that word is fun to say, and found a ship going to Tarshish. So he paid the fare and went down into it to go with them to Tarshish, away from the presence of the Lord. So we've had Tarshish repeated 3 times now, and the phrase away from the presence of the Lord twice. So that's very important. Verse 4, but, so Jonah's on his way, pause, break. But the Lord hurled a great whirlwind upon the sea, and there was a mighty tempest on the sea, so that the ship threatened to break up, meaning like explode, come apart, unravel. Then the mariners were afraid. Guys who live their lives on the sea are terrified, and each cried out to his God. And they hurled the cargo that was in the ship, which is probably very valuable, into the sea to lighten it for them. But Jonah had gone down into the inner part of the ship and laid down and was fast asleep. What can we learn about this or from this text? Firstly, I want to just explain it. Jonah is a prophet. A prophet was somebody who spoke for God, who often spoke to the nation of Israel to tell them about the future, about what was to come. Obviously, these were God's words given to the prophet, but more specifically, God would often send prophets to the nation of Israel for the express purpose of preaching against them, to repent from their sin and their idolatry. You see, that is the crux of Isaiah's ministry, Jeremiah's ministry, Ezekiel, not the crux, I mean the gist rather, or the meat of their ministry. I'm having a hard time with my words, forgive me. But a prophet's main job was to call out against God's people to repent. Here you have God saying to Jonah, arise, go to Nineveh. Nineveh was an Assyrian city. If you know anything about the Assyrians, they were at one point in time Israel's enemies. And God says, go to this city, Nineveh, and call out against them, meaning tell them to repent, that doom is coming. Why? Their evil has come up before me. So here God tells Jonah, his prophet, to go to my nation's, my people's enemy, preach against them. And he doesn't want to go. Look what happens. But Jonah rose to flee to Tarshish. If you know anything about geography, which I'm horrible with geography, but what I remember is that Tarshish is about as far west, I believe it's west, away from Nineveh as you could get on a map. I believe it was kind of close to Spain, what is today known as Spain. So you couldn't go any far west in that day. He was trying to get away from where God called him to go. And he pays a fare. Jonah is so insistent on rebelling that he leaves his people, where he's comfortable, leaves the worship of God, goes as far away as he can, pays for it, and then is able to sleep soundly during a storm on a boat. That's how much he wants to rebel. And so first kind of lesson for us, man, how much our sin can blind us as God's people. I mean, Jonah's a believer, in the Old Testament sense. And yet he's so blinded by his sin, so blinded by what he wants to do or not do, so willing to rebel against God. Look at the measures that he takes. A believer can rebel like this. It's scary. We need to guard our hearts against disobedience to the Lord. But this is what's even more shocking but amazing. But the Lord hurled a great wind upon the sea, and there was a mighty tempest on the sea, so that the ship threatened to break up. The Lord is behind this storm. It's not some random storm that's happening. Here's what I want you to grasp. Second point. We can rebel against God, yes. And this is for believers. Believers can rebel against God. But for a believer, God always intervenes in their rebellion. Always. He will always seek out his children. There is nowhere you can run and hide to get away from the God who purchased you with the blood of his Son to make you his own. You are his. You cannot escape this Father. He won't let you. Which, practically speaking, and this is both frustrating to a believer who's in rebellion, but a great comfort, though, to our souls for when we rebel. Our best efforts cannot thwart God's plans, and they cannot thwart specifically his plans for us. Jonah would eventually arrive at Nineveh in a supernatural, crazy way. He would get there and do what God called him to do. Nothing Jonah could do could stop what God had planned for the city of Nineveh, and nothing could stop God for what he had planned for Jonah's involvement in this. It's not like, God was going to send someone to Nineveh to crowd against it. Jonah didn't want to go, and so, God's like, well, too bad. I guess I can't send Jonah. I'll find someone else. I will accomplish my plan. No. God will use who he wants to accomplish what he wants. He is sovereign, brothers and sisters. Lastly, what I want us to see in this, so we've seen so far that believers can rebel. God will always seek out his rebellious children, and that God will always get his way, his plan for the world and for his people. Fourthly, our idols are powerless and useless and unable to do any of those things that I just said. Our idols don't seek us out. Our idols cannot get their way. Our idols are powerless. Look at what happens. You have all these mariners scared out of their minds, and they live on the sea, and they're terrified they're going to die. That's why they're throwing cargo in the water. And it says that they cry out to their God. Now, it's not that there's like one God and he failed. All these mariners on this ship crying out to all of their gods. They're trying everything. All the gods they can call out to, as many as they can. If you're out there, save us. If you're out there, save us. And guess what? They can do nothing against the God of Israel. Our idols are worthless. They cannot beat God. They cannot save us from God. They cannot thwart his plan. So brothers and sisters, I challenge and encourage you today. If you are walking in rebellion against God, repent. If you are not sensing God's pursuit of you at all, he's not chastising you, a good chance might be you're not a believer. But if you are sensing guilt, if you are hearing this right now as his child, more than likely it is him reaching out to you through his word to say, repent, come back to me, I will restore you, I will use you, come back. Pray for those who rebel and are God's children, that God would indeed do this. So really quick to recap, we have learned that God's people can rebel, but that God always seeks out his rebellious children. God always gets his way with his rebellious children, that his plans will come to pass. We cannot thwart them or change them or challenge them. And our idols are not like that. They are useless in comparison to the one true and living God. I trust that this has been an encouragement or a challenge to you. Again, you may reach out to me at any time for any reason. Please do so. I'd love to hear from you. I trust that God is keeping you safe and keeping you close to Him. Bye-bye now, and we'll see you on Thursday for the next section of Well of the Word.